already see what veganism is. It's the elimination of meat derivatives and byproducts. And you could be sort of forgiven for thinking that this is kind of like a bit of a niche area. Why is James dedicating a whole sort of tutorial to this particular topic area? And the reason is this one. If we look, that's a B by the way, if we look between 2014 and 2019, if we look at this period of time, in the UK, veganism quadrupled, okay? So the number of people who describe themselves as vegan quadrupled. There are now, in 2019, there are 4 times as many as there were in 2014. Now, it is true that this still only takes up 1.2% of the population, which you might be thinking, okay, just over 1 in 100 people, it's not that many. But this is kind of quite a drastic diet. It's quite a significant change to the typical cultural diet in the UK. So therefore, this is a trend that should be considered to be really quite important. The second point I would make as well is that a lot of what is surrounding veganism and the reasons for veganism are also wrapped up in kind of a broad ecological question. What I mean by that is that in a time of threatening climate change, in a time where people are worried deeply about the environment, veganism goes hand in hand with that sort of conversation because it has certain benefits outside of the animal rights, such as the fact that cattle and livestock, they produce a lot of methane, which of course is a greenhouse gas and contributes to climate change. So a couple of points I want to make about veganism and things that I'd like you to consider. Now, I'm not advocating veganism to you. I've never been vegan in my life, therefore I can't give you a personal account of this, but a couple of things that I'd like you to think about it. First of all, we can certainly say with fairness that veganism is quite restrictive, okay? And what I mean by that is, of course, we're eliminating a lot of foodstuffs which would be typical and culturally normal. But we are saying here that it's very popular, okay? So it's very popular. And I also want you to be aware that veganism is sometimes referred to as a plant-based diet. Now, with that in mind, I want to go back to our definition, and I just want to dwell on a couple of those points that you kind of want to consider. So we've said that a vegan will not eat meat. So a vegan, for example, is not going to eat a piece of chicken or a piece of salmon. They're not going to eat meat derivatives. Now, this is broadly going to include things like dairy. This is broadly going to include things like eggs. So, for example, cow's milk, for example, it is not meat. It does not involve the harming and the death of an animal, but vegans won't eat it. First, because it's taken from an animal, but also because of some of the associated behaviours. For example, mothering cows may have their calves taken away from them and could even be slaughtered. By the way, I want to be cautious what I say, because I'm not trying to promote this, I'm just giving you the information. But they will also eliminate byproducts. So again, consider that a byproduct could be something like honey. Consider that a byproduct could be something like gelatin. Gelatin is used as a gelling agent in things like desserts. Consider that it could include potentially things like leather. A vegan will not probably wear leather. I am aware of a friend of mine who's a vegan, and they will not use certain, for example, postage stamps or envelopes because they contain a glue, like the sticky part of it, which is effectively made by boiling down animal bones. So vegans are very, very serious about this kind of commitment that they've got to their lifestyle, and I give that massive respect. It's not my way personally, but to make that commitment and to take those actions against what is the dominant culture, I think we have to give some respect for. Now, before we get into the kind of the really big question I want to ask in this particular tutorial, I also want to tell you about what would be called a subset of vegans. And I think, you'll find this kind of interesting. There are a small number but growing number of vegans who are considered to be raw vegans. And these are vegans that not only eat a plant-based diet, but they only do so with raw ingredients. So in other words, they don't cook those plants, for example. And it's uncertain at this point whether there are additional health benefits, though some people claim that there are. I'm representing that possibility to you. Now, the final thing I kind of want to touch on, or almost the final thing, is I want to present this point to you. When we think about veganism, we can ask what I would call the protein question. We've previously studied that a healthy diet has 10 to 15% of its nutritional value derived from proteins. Now, those proteins will often, in many people's diets, come from fish, from dairy, from meat, etc., etc., etc. So when we think about veganism, one of our key questions can be, is there sufficient protein in the diet? And this ultimately is the answer to that. And it's this one. Plants do contain proteins. And when you study GCSE biology, for example, you're actually going to study a little bit about plant protein synthesis, but plants do contain proteins. And excellent examples of this would be things like legumes. Legumes are things like nuts and beans. Legumes and lentils are excellent examples of where protein can be derived from plant-based diet. But a couple of additional points. We're also saying that these plants, they may not provide sufficient variety of protein, may not provide sufficient or the full range of variety, sufficient variety. Now, if we go back to our protein lesson, let's assume you guys have studied that one. When we did the protein lesson, we said that there's a whole bunch of essential amino acids. Now, in total, there are 20 different amino acids. Okay, and there are 9 of those amino acids that are considered essential. And the point we are making here is that a vegan is going to find it harder and needs to be very focused on ensuring they get all 9 of those essential proteins in sufficient quantity to have a healthy and balanced diet. Okay, so no one's saying that a vegan diet is always unhealthy. The point that needs to be made is it needs to be planned and considered to make it healthy. But I also make another point, there's loads of people who are not vegetarian, not vegan, who don't even eat a remotely healthy diet and get the right level of protein. So we've got to be careful to ask the same question in all directions. Now, and I want to make this last point, even if theoretically possible, and that is that we get enough protein, most don't. So most people fall short of that kind of ideal vegan diet, and as a result of that, they may not get enough protein, may not be able to take on all 9 essential amino acids, and therefore they might suffer as a result of that to some degree. Now, I just want to make one final point, and that is that vegans feel very strongly. And one of the things I've sort of found when I'm talking about veganism is that people kind of mock veganism quite commonly, quite easily. The only point I'm not a vegan, by the way, but I just want to remind you that if you do know someone that's vegan, they probably feel very, very strongly about it. And that doesn't mean they should be forcing onto you or saying you should do it. But at the same time, do respect people that are doing this, because it's a big life decision, it's a big commitment, and it's something they're doing in their opinion for the right reasons, which is typically about animal rights and about the meat industry. And therefore, we just want to give it a little bit of kudos and respect. Even if it's not for us, we want to understand what other people are doing it for. Thanks.